The stars burned bright over the Velcor homeworld, but Commander Jaren could barely see them through the smoke and fire. His ship shook as another explosion rocked the hull. Around him, his crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to keep the vessel alive for just a few more minutes. "Sir, the shields are failing," his weapons officer reported. Her voice trembled despite her training. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they collapse completely." Jaren looked at the tactical display and felt his heart sink. The Krath ships surrounded them like predators circling wounded prey. Their black vessels moved with terrible purpose, firing continuously at what remained of the Velcor defense fleet. 200 ships had defended this system just 3 days ago. Now only 38 remained, and most of those were badly damaged. Below them, the planet burned. The Krath had broken through the planetary shields 2 hours earlier. Now their ground forces were slaughtering civilians in the cities. Jaren could see the fires from orbit, bright orange scars across the face of his beautiful world. Millions were dying while he watched helplessly from space. "Commander, we need to retreat," his second officer said quietly. "If we stay here, we all die." "And if we run, everyone on the planet dies," Jaren replied. His voice was calm, but his hands gripped the command chair hard enough to hurt. "We hold this position. We protect the evacuation shuttles for as long as we can." "Sir, there are no more evacuation shuttles. They've all been destroyed or driven back. We're not protecting anyone anymore. We're just dying slowly." Jaren closed his eyes. The officer was right. They had failed. The Velcor civilization, 3,000 years of culture and history and achievement, was ending today. His people would become another extinct species, another cautionary tale told by the survivors in other star systems. "Activate the emergency beacon," he said. The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. The emergency beacon was the last resort, a desperate cry for help that broadcast to every civilization within 100 light-years. It was an admission of complete defeat, a plea for anyone to come and save them. "Sir, the beacon will reach dozens of systems, but none of them will send military help," his communications officer said. "The protocols don't work that way. They might send medical ships or refugee transports, but not warships. Not in time to matter." "I know," Jaren said, "but we have to try." "Activate it." The officer's hands moved across her console. Deep in the ship's core, ancient machinery came to life. The beacon was old technology, dating back thousands of years to when the first civilizations had agreed to help each other in times of crisis. In practice, that help usually meant kind words and small amounts of aid. No one risked their own people to save strangers, but it was all they had left. "Beacon active and broadcasting," the officer confirmed. "All nearby systems will receive our distress call within the next few hours." Jaren nodded. He opened a fleet-wide channel to address what remained of his forces. "All ships, this is Commander Jaren. We have activated the emergency beacon. Help may or may not come, but regardless, we continue to fight. We make the Krath pay for every meter of space they take. We show them that the Velcor do not surrender. We show them that we die with honor." The responses came back quickly. Every captain agreed. They would fight to the end. Jaren turned back to the view screen and watched another of his ships explode in a flash of light. The Krath were not slowing down. They never did. They were locusts made of metal and hate, consuming everything in their path. They had destroyed 47 civilizations already. The Velcor would be number 48. 3 Krath dreadnoughts moved into position, preparing to fire their main weapons. Jaren calculated that his ship had perhaps 5 minutes left. He thought about his family on the planet below. He hoped they had died quickly. Then the sensor officer gasped. "Commander, I'm detecting new contacts. Multiple ships translating into the system." "Krath reinforcements?" Jaren asked. His voice was flat. It didn't matter anymore. They were already overwhelmed. "No, sir. The signature is wrong. These ships are coming from a different direction entirely." "From human space," Jaren turned sharply. "That's impossible. Humans are 200 light-years away. Our beacon just activated. They couldn't have received it yet." "I'm reading the data correctly, sir. 463 vessels. They're human ships, and they're moving into combat formation at the edge of our system." The bridge crew stared at their instruments in disbelief. Jaren felt something he hadn't felt in days. A tiny spark of hope. "How is this possible?" his second officer whispered. Before anyone could answer, the communications console lit up. A new voice filled the bridge, speaking in heavily accented but understandable Velcor language. The translation was rough but clear. Velcor vessels, this is Admiral Kevin Price of the United Nations Space Command. We are here to help. Hold your position and maintain defensive formation. Relief is coming, Jaren found his voice. Admiral Price, we did not call for your assistance. Our beacon was just activated. You could not have received it. How did you know to come? There was a pause. When the human admiral spoke again, Jaren could hear the smile in his voice. Commander, we've been watching the Krath for months. We knew they were going to attack you. We positioned our fleet nearby and waited. We're done waiting now. You came before we asked. We came because it was the right thing to do. Now hold tight, Commander. We're going to introduce the Krath to human warfare. On the view screen, the human fleet surged forward. 463 warships accelerated toward the battle at speeds that seemed impossible for vessels of their size. They moved with perfect coordination, arranging themselves into attack formations that Jaren had never seen before. The Krath ships began turning to face this new threat. They had numbers on their side, over 600 vessels to humanity's 463. But Jaren noticed something strange. The Krath were hesitating. They had never faced humans before. They didn't know what to expect. They were about to find out. The human fleet opened fire and space itself seemed to explode with light and fury. Railgun rounds crossed the distance between the fleets in seconds. Missiles streaked through the darkness, their trails like angry comets. The human ships didn't slow down or try to maintain safe distances. They charged directly at the Krath formation like predators attacking prey. Jaren watched in amazement as the first wave of human fire slammed into the Krath ships. Dozens of enemy vessels exploded or went dark, their systems overloaded by the sheer violence of the assault. The humans fought with a ferocity that took his breath away. They weren't just defending the Velcor. They were attacking with rage as if the Krath had personally offended them. Sir, the Krath are breaking formation, the tactical officer reported. Her voice was filled with disbelief. They're trying to swarm the human ships, but the humans are tearing them apart. Jaren could see it happening on his screens. The Krath swarming tactics, which had overwhelmed every other species they encountered, were failing against the humans. Every time the Krath tried to surround a human ship, that ship would explode with defensive fire, destroying everything around it. The humans fought like they were designed for this exact type of combat. All ships reform on my position, Jaren ordered. His crew moved with renewed energy. They weren't finished yet. They could still fight. We support the human fleet. Target any Krath ships that try to flank them. The Velcor ships moved into position alongside their unexpected allies. Together, human and Velcor vessels pushed back against the Krath swarm. For the first time in days, Jaren allowed himself to believe they might survive this. The battle raged for hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The humans had brought not just ships, but a completely different way of fighting. They were aggressive, creative, and utterly relentless. They took risks that seemed insane, diving into situations that should have been suicide, only to emerge victorious through superior firepower and coordination. As dawn broke over the Velcor homeworld, the last Krath ships were fleeing the system or surrendering. The human fleet had won a complete victory. 400 ships had defeated 600, rescued a dying civilization, and changed the course of galactic history, all because they had answered a call for help before it was even made. Admiral Kevin Price stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. His gray hair was cut short in military style, and his blue eyes tracked every movement on the tactical displays. Around him, his crew worked with practiced efficiency, calling out status reports and coordinating the fleet's movements. Sir, the Krath are attempting to reform their lines, Lieutenant Helen Carter reported from the tactical station. They're trying to create a defensive perimeter around their command ships. Don't let them, Price ordered. Signal Captain Lisa Morgan. Tell her battle group to punch through their center. I want those command ships isolated and destroyed. Yes, sir. Price had been preparing for this moment for 6 months. Intelligence reports had warned him that the Krath were expanding toward Velcor territory. He had studied every battle the Krath had fought, analyzed their tactics, and identified their weaknesses. Then he had done something that shocked the United Nations command structure. He had moved 3 entire fleets into position near Velcor space and waited. Many had called it reckless. Some had called it warmongering. Price had called it necessary. He had watched too many species get destroyed while the galaxy debated whether to help. He had decided that humanity would be different. They would act, not debate. They would protect, not watch. Now his gamble was paying off. Captain Morgan acknowledges, Carter reported. Her destroyers are moving into attack position. On the main view screen, Price watched as a dozen human destroyers accelerated toward the Krath formation. These ships were smaller than the battleships and carriers, but they were fast and deadly. They carried enough firepower to crack open a small moon, and their crews were trained to fight at close range where most species feared to go. Captain Lisa Morgan commanded the lead ship. She had been in the Navy for 15 years and had a reputation for aggressive tactics. Her ship, the Relentless, dove straight into the gap between two Krath cruisers. The enemy vessels tried to target her, but she was moving too fast and changing course too often. All weapons fire at will, Morgan ordered. Her voice was calm despite the chaos around her. Point defense systems online. Show them what we can do. The Relentless opened fire with every weapon it had. Railguns hurled metal slugs at a fraction of light speed. Missile tubes launched smart weapons that twisted and turned through space to find their targets. Laser batteries carved through enemy hulls with surgical precision. In 30 seconds, the destroyer had destroyed or disabled 6 Krath vessels. They're trying to surround us, her executive officer warned. Good, Morgan replied. That puts them exactly where we want them. The point defense grid activated. 64 laser turrets and 32 automated cannons began tracking and destroying anything that came close. The Krath had never fought an enemy with such sophisticated defensive systems. Their swarming tactics depended on overwhelming targets with numbers. But every ship they sent near the Relentless was shredded by automated fire. Behind the destroyers, the human carrier groups launched their fighters. Small craft poured from the hangars like angry hornets, each one piloted by someone who had trained their whole life for this moment. The SF-97 Valkyrie fighters were humanity's pride, fast and maneuverable with weapons that could take down ships 10 times their size. Lieutenant Jake Cooper flew his Valkyrie through a storm of enemy fire. His artificial intelligence co-pilot, which he called Athena, fed him targeting data directly through his neural implant. The information appeared in his mind as naturally as his own thoughts. 3 targets ahead, Athena reported. Krath interceptors attempting to engage our bomber squadrons. Then let's stop them, Cooper said. He fired his thrusters and rolled his fighter into a diving attack. His targeting system locked onto the lead Krath ship, Fox 3, 2 missiles launched from his Valkyrie. They streaked across the distance and slammed into the enemy fighter. The Krath ship exploded in a bright flash. Good kill, Cooper said. Next target. Jake, you have incoming on your 6, his wingman called over the squadron channel. 4 hostiles, I see them. Athena, execute evasive pattern 7. That maneuver will subject you to 9.4 gravities of acceleration, the AI warned. Risk of blackout is high. Do it anyway. The Valkyrie twisted through space in a pattern that should have been impossible. Cooper's vision went gray at the edges as the G-forces crushed down on him, but he stayed conscious through sheer willpower and training. His compression suit tightened around his body, forcing blood back to his brain. Chemical injectors in his flight suit released stimulants that kept him alert. When the maneuver ended, Cooper had a perfect shot at his pursuers. His cannon spun up and fired a burst of depleted uranium rounds. 3 of the 4 Krath fighters disintegrated. The 4th tried to run but was hit by missiles from Cooper's wingman. Thanks for the assist, Amy, Cooper said to his wingman. Buy me a drink when we get back, Lieutenant Amy Foster replied. Now let's help those bombers. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out hundreds of times. Human pilots and crews fought with a combination of training, technology, and sheer determination that the Krath had never encountered. They took risks that seemed insane to other species. They flew into danger that should have killed them, and they won again and again. On the planet below, the fighting was just as intense. The Krath had landed ground forces in 3 cities before the human fleet arrived. They were slaughtering civilians and executing prisoners. When Admiral Price learned about this, his expression had turned to stone. Get me Colonel Sarah Mitchell, he had ordered. Now, Colonel Mitchell and her Marines were dropping onto the planet in assault pods. Each pod carried 4 Marines in powered armor, along with enough weapons and ammunition to fight a small war. The pods hit the atmosphere at speeds that turned their hulls white-hot, but advanced heat shields kept the occupants safe. Sergeant Danny Cruz was in the first wave. His pod crashed through the roof of a Krath command center like a meteor. Before the dust settled, he was out and moving. His armor's sensors identified 17 enemy soldiers and 4 Velcor prisoners. Cruz didn't hesitate. His rifle came up and he fired in one smooth motion. 3 rounds hit the nearest Krath soldier in the head. The alien went down. Cruz was already moving to his next target. His armor's servos amplified his strength, letting him cross the room in 3 huge strides. He hit the second Krath like a truck, sending the alien flying across the room. His rifle tracked and fired. Each movement was precise, each shot deadly. In 8 seconds, all 17 Krath soldiers were dead or dying. Civilians secure, Cruz reported over his squad channel. Moving to next objective. The Velcor prisoners stared at him in shock. They had been seconds from execution. Now they were saved by a human soldier who had appeared out of nowhere and killed their captors with terrifying efficiency. Cruz's translator activated automatically. "You're safe now," he told them in their own language. "Stay here. Medical teams will arrive in 5 minutes." Then he was gone, crashing through a wall to reach the next group of prisoners. Behind him, the rest of his squad spread through the building like an unstoppable force. The Krath ground troops had thought they were apex predators. They learned differently when they met human Marines who were angry. Back in space, the tide of battle was turning decisively. The Krath had started with numerical superiority, but they were losing ships faster than they could react. Their command structure was breaking down. Their swarming tactics were failing. And for the first time in their history of conquest, they were facing an enemy that fought with more aggression than they did. Hive Commander, Zal then felt something new through the Krath collective consciousness. Confusion, fear. The humans were supposed to be weak mammals, individuals without the strength of a unified mind. But they fought as if they shared one will, one purpose. They coordinated better than species with hive minds. They adapted faster than any enemy the Krath had faced. How are they doing this? Zal then demanded through the neural network that connected all Krath vessels. They are individuals. They should not be able to fight as one. No answer came that made sense. The humans simply continued their assault, tearing through the Krath fleet with methodical precision. "All ships, retreat to the outer system," Zal then finally ordered. "We must analyze their tactics and reform." But Admiral Price had anticipated this. "They're trying to run," he said calmly. "Captain Gregory Walsh, your orders are to pursue and engage. Don't let them regroup." "With pleasure, sir," Walsh replied. He commanded a dreadnought called the Harbinger, a massive ship designed for one purpose, overwhelming firepower. "All ships of Battle Group 7, follow me. Let's show these bugs that you don't get to attack innocent people and just fly away." The Harbinger and its escorts surged forward. They caught the retreating Krath ships and fell upon them like wolves. Walsh fought with brutal efficiency, using his dreadnought's heavy weapons to crack open enemy vessels one after another. Meanwhile, a different kind of battle was being fought. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Green sat in the electronic warfare suite of a stealth ship called the Invisible Hand. While the big ships fought with guns and missiles, she fought with code and data. "I'm inside their network," she reported to her captain. "They're using a..." 3 days after the battle, Commander Jaren stood in the cargo hold of a captured Krath cruiser and tried not to be sick. Around him, human soldiers in sealed armor moved carefully through the space, documenting everything they found. What they had discovered made even hardened warriors pause in horror. The room was filled with stasis pods, thousands of them stacked from floor to ceiling. Inside each pod was a person. Not just Velcor, though there were hundreds of his people here. There were members of species Jaren had never seen before. Some had been in these pods for years, kept alive but unconscious, waiting for whatever the Krath had planned for them. "We've found similar chambers on 43 other Krath ships," Lieutenant Beth Sanders told him. She was a human lawyer who had volunteered for the boarding teams. Her job was to document war crimes. Current count is over 50,000 prisoners from 17 different species. Jaren felt his legs weaken. 50,000. By the ancestors. "We're waking them up as carefully as we can," Sanders continued. She was professional, but Jaren could hear the anger in her voice. "Medical teams are working around the clock. Most of them will survive, though they'll need extensive treatment." "Why did the Krath keep them?" Jaren asked. "Why not just kill them?" "We're not sure yet. Some of the prisoners we've revived say the Krath were using them for experiments, testing biological weapons, studying how different species respond to various toxins. It's systematic, organized evil." Jaren turned away from the pods. He had fought wars before. He had seen death. But this was different. This was methodical cruelty on a scale he couldn't comprehend. What will happen to them? The prisoners, I mean. We'll return them to their homeworlds when they're healthy enough to travel. Some of these people have been missing for years. Their families think they're dead. Can you imagine what it will be like when they come home? Jaren could imagine. He thought about all the Velcor families who had lost loved ones to the Krath. They had mourned, held funerals, tried to move on. Now some of those people would return from the dead. It would be a miracle, but also traumatic. Your people did this, he said quietly. You humans. You saved all of them. Sanders shook her head. We just showed up. You and your people held the line for days against impossible odds. You gave us time to arrive. We couldn't have saved anyone if you had given up. Before Jaren could respond, his communicator buzzed. It was a message from Admiral Price. The human wanted to meet with him aboard the flagship. Jaren excused himself and took a shuttle to the Defiance. The human flagship was impressive. Where Velcor ships were built for elegance and efficiency, human vessels were built for war. Every surface bristled with weapons. Every system was designed for combat. Even the corridors had armored doors that could seal in seconds, turning the entire ship into a maze of fortified positions. Admiral Price met him in a conference room that overlooked the planet. Through the large windows, Jaren could see his homeworld slowly healing. The fires were out. Human engineering teams were helping repair the damaged cities. Medical ships were treating the wounded. It looked like hope. Commander Jaren, Price said, shaking his hand in the human custom. Thank you for coming. Please sit, Jaren sat. The human chairs were designed for different anatomy, but they were comfortable enough. Admiral, I wanted to thank you again for what your people have done. We owe you everything. You don't owe us anything, Price said firmly. We did what anyone should have done, though I admit we're one of the few who actually would have. Why did you really come? You said you were tracking the Krath, but there must be more to it. Your fleet was positioned perfectly. You knew exactly when to strike. Price was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the planet below, his expression thoughtful. Commander, humanity has a complicated history. We've done terrible things to each other. Wars, genocides, slavery. For a long time we were our own worst enemy. But we eventually learned something important. We learned that standing by and doing nothing has a cost. A moral cost that eats at your soul. I don't understand. There was a time in human history when one group of humans decided to exterminate another group. They built camps. They killed millions. Other humans knew it was happening, but many chose not to get involved. They said it wasn't their problem. When it was finally over, those who had stood by carried guilt for the rest of their lives. They asked themselves, why didn't we do something? Jaren felt a chill, and you decided never to ask that question again. Exactly. When we went to the stars, we promised ourselves that if we ever saw another species facing extinction, we would act. We would be the ones who showed up. We would be the ones who answered the call for help. Even if it meant risking your own people, especially then, because that's what makes it meaningful. Anyone can help when it's easy. True character is shown when you help when it's hard. Jaren absorbed this. The Galactic Council will not be happy. You acted without authorization. You brought warships into sovereign space. You engaged in combat that was not your concern. Price smiled grimly. Let them be unhappy. I'd rather face bureaucratic complaints than look in the mirror knowing I let an entire civilization die because I didn't want to break protocol. You're going to change the galaxy, Jaren said. It wasn't a question. That's the plan. One rescue at a time. Later that day, Jaren attended a ceremony on the planet's surface. The humans had organized it quickly, but it was meaningful. Human and Velcor soldiers stood side by side in a plaza that had been a battlefield 3 days earlier. Now it was cleared of debris and temporary structures had been erected. Colonel Sarah Mitchell stepped forward to speak. The translation devices made her words understandable to everyone present. We gather here to honor those who fell defending this world. Velcor and human, we bled together. We fought together. And we won together. The bonds forged in battle are the strongest bonds of all. Today, we are not two species. We are brothers and sisters in arms. Jaren watched as medals were presented to both human and Velcor soldiers who had shown exceptional courage. He saw his own people standing straighter, pride returning to their eyes. They had been on the edge of despair. Now they had hope, but the ceremony also reminded him of the cost. Hundreds of Velcor ships had been destroyed. Thousands of his people had died. The planet had been scarred. It would take years to fully recover. When the ceremony ended, Jaren found himself walking through the city with Sergeant Danny Cruz, the human Marine who had rescued so many civilians. The sergeant was out of his armor now, wearing a simple uniform. He was younger than Jaren had expected, perhaps 25 in human years. "How do you do it?" Jaren asked. "How do you train your soldiers to be so fearless?" Cruz laughed. "We're not fearless. We're scared all the time, but we're trained to act anyway. Fear is natural. Courage is choosing to move forward despite the fear. Your people seem to have a lot of courage. We've had a lot of practice. Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've gotten pretty good at it. Now we're trying to use those skills for something better." They walked past a building that was being repaired. Human engineers worked alongside Velcor construction teams, sharing techniques and tools. Children played in the street, watched over by both human Marines and Velcor police. It was a scene of cooperation that would have been impossible to imagine a week ago. "What happens now?" Jaren asked. "Your fleet can't stay here forever. Most of us will leave once we're sure the Krath won't come back. But some will stay. We've offered to help with reconstruction, training your military, establishing defense networks. We want to make sure this never happens again." "And what do you want in return?" Cruz stopped walking and looked at him seriously. "We want you to remember this. Remember what it felt like to be helpless, to face extinction, to need help desperately. And someday, when another species is in the same situation, we want you to do for them what we did for you." Jaren felt the weight of those words. "You're asking us to become like you, to be the ones who answer the call. We're asking you to be better than you were, better than the galaxy has been. Someone needs to stand up for the innocent. Someone needs to say that genocide is not acceptable. Why not us? Why not you?" That night, Jaren couldn't sleep. He stood on a balcony overlooking the city and thought about everything that had happened. A week ago, he had been preparing to die. Now he was alive, his people were safe, and he had a choice to make. The humans had shown him a different way. They had proven that one species could make a difference. They had demonstrated that courage and moral clarity could overcome any obstacle. They had saved his entire civilization without asking for anything in return except that he pay it forward. Could the Velcor do the same? Could they become a species that protected others instead of just protecting themselves? It would mean changing everything about how they thought of their place in the galaxy. It would mean taking risks. It would mean being willing to sacrifice for strangers. But after seeing what the humans had done, how could he say no? The next morning, Jaren requested a meeting with his government's leadership. He had a proposal to make. The Velcor would rebuild their fleet, but not just for defense. They would build it to help others. They would join with humanity in creating something new, an alliance based not on trade or... Ambassador Claire Rodriguez stood before the Galactic Council and felt the weight of 247 civilizations staring at her. The council chamber was enormous, a space station built at the exact center of known space. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy gathered here to debate, discuss, and occasionally make decisions. Today they were all focused on one thing: what humanity had done at Velcor. The council speaker, an ancient being called Tolmarath, addressed the assembly. His species had been traveling the stars for millions of years. He spoke with the authority of age and tradition. "We are here to discuss the human intervention in the Velcor system. The humans brought 3 military fleets into a sovereign system without authorization. They engaged in combat that destroyed hundreds of vessels. They have captured thousands of Krath prisoners and are holding them without council oversight." "Ambassador Rodriguez, explain yourself." Claire stood slowly. She was 43 years old, a career diplomat who had spent decades learning to navigate complex political situations. But today she decided to dispense with diplomacy. Today she would speak plainly. The Velcor were being exterminated. "They called for help," we answered. That's all the explanation required. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several representatives began speaking at once, but Tolmarath raised a hand for silence. "You violated established protocols. The Council has procedures for responding to distress calls. You ignored those procedures." "Your procedures are too slow," Claire replied. "By the time the Council would have debated and voted and sent a committee to investigate, the Velcor would have been extinct. We had the power to help immediately, so we did." A reptilian representative named Keshatar spoke up, his voice dripping with disdain. You are a young species, barely 70 years among the stars. You do not understand the complexities of galactic politics. There are reasons we do not rush into conflicts. I understand perfectly, Claire said. The reasons are fear and selfishness. You don't want to risk your own people to save strangers. You hide behind complexity and protocol because it's easier than doing the right thing. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Several representatives demanded that Claire be removed. Others called for sanctions against humanity. Tolmarath let them argue for a full minute before calling for silence again. Ambassador Rodriguez, you speak boldly for someone whose species has existed for such a short time. Do you truly believe that all of us civilizations that have survived for millions of years are wrong? Yes, Claire said simply. You've built a galaxy where the strong prey on the weak and everyone pretends not to notice. The Krath conquered 47 systems before anyone stopped them. 47 civilizations destroyed or enslaved. Billions of sentient beings killed or imprisoned. And what did the Council do? Nothing. You debated. You expressed concern. You sent strongly worded messages. But you did nothing. It is not the Council's place to interfere in sovereign conflicts, another representative argued. The Krath weren't engaging in a sovereign conflict. They were committing genocide. There's a difference. And if this Council can't tell the difference, then this Council is useless. More angry voices. More demands for Claire's removal. She stood calmly and waited for them to quiet down. She had expected this reaction. The Council had existed for thousands of years on the principle of non-interference. Humanity was challenging that principle directly. Finally, Tolmarath spoke again. What does humanity want, Ambassador? You have demonstrated your military strength. You have embarrassed the Council. You have violated our most sacred principles. What is your goal? We want the galaxy to be better, Claire said. We want a place where calling for help actually means someone will come. We want aggressors like the Krath to fear consequences. We want the innocent to be protected, not sacrificed on the altar of political convenience. And you believe humanity can provide this? We're willing to try, which is more than I can say for most of the species in this room. A new voice spoke up. It belonged to a representative from a species called the Pelthion. They had been one of the Krath's earlier victims, losing half their population before the swarm moved on to easier targets. Ambassador Rodriguez, my people know what it is like to face extinction. We called for help just as the Velcor did. No one came. We survived but barely. When we heard that humans had saved the Velcor, we felt something we had not felt in years. Hope. Claire turned to face the Pelthion representative. We should have been there for your people too. I'm sorry we weren't. You did not even know we existed then. You are still confined to your own system. But you are here now. And you are offering something new. My government has authorized me to ask. Would humanity be willing to extend its protection to other species who face similar threats? The chamber fell silent. This was the moment that would define everything. If Claire said yes, humanity would be committing to a role as galactic protector. It would mean endless conflicts, constant vigilance, and significant cost. But if she said no, she would be admitting that humanity's intervention at Velcor was just a one-time action with no larger meaning. Claire took a deep breath. Yes, if your people face an existential threat and call for help, humanity will answer. We will do for you what we did for the Velcor. This is madness, Keshatar hissed. You cannot possibly defend every species in the galaxy. You will overextend yourselves and collapse. Maybe, Claire agreed, but we're going to try anyway, and we're inviting others to join us. Any species that shares our values, any civilization that believes the strong should protect the weak, is welcome to work with us. Together we can build something better than what exists now. Over the next hour, something extraordinary happened. One by one, representatives from smaller civilizations began standing up and expressing interest in humanity's proposal. These were species that lived in fear of their larger neighbors, species that had no voice in council decisions, species that had suffered while the galaxy watched. By the end of the session, 23 civilizations had expressed formal interest in working with humanity. The council leadership was furious, but they couldn't stop it. Claire had touched something that had been dormant in the galaxy for a long time, the hope that things could be different. When the session finally ended, Claire returned to her quarters exhausted but satisfied. She had gambled everything on the belief that there were others in the galaxy who wanted change. It appeared she had been right. Her communicator buzzed. It was a message from Admiral Price. "I watched your speech to the Council," the message said. "Well done, Ambassador. You just changed the galaxy. Now we need to figure out how to live up to the promises you made." Claire smiled. That was the challenge, wasn't it? It was one thing to make bold declarations. It was another thing entirely to follow through. But if anyone could do it, it was humanity. They had already proven they were willing to take risks for the sake of others. Now they just had to prove they could sustain that commitment. Back in the Velcor system, Admiral Price was having his own important conversation. He sat across from Commander Jaren in a small conference room. Between them sat a proposal that would change both their civilizations. "You want to join us?" Price said, reading through the document Jaren had presented. "Not just a military alliance. You want the Velcor to become part of what we're building." "Yes," Jaren confirmed. "We've discussed it at the highest levels of our government. We want to help others the way you helped us. We have ships, resources, and people who are willing to fight for something larger than themselves. It won't be easy. You'll be committing your military to operations far from home. Your people will die in conflicts that don't directly involve Velcor interests. The Council will pressure you to withdraw. Are you ready for that? We've already faced extinction once. We know what it means to stand alone against impossible odds. If we can spare even one other species from experiencing that, then yes, we're ready." Price studied the Velcor commander. He saw determination in those alien eyes. He saw someone who had been changed by what he had witnessed. The battle at Velcor hadn't just saved a civilization. It had inspired one. "Then welcome to what we're calling the Terran Defense Coalition," Price said, extending his hand. "We're making this up as we go, but I think together we can accomplish something remarkable." Jaren shook his hand. "What happens now?" "Now we prepare. We've identified several other systems where the Krath were planning attacks. We're going to position forces to intercept them. We're also going to start training programs. Your people and ours need to learn to fight together. Our technologies and tactics need to integrate. How long will that take? Months, at least. But we don't have months, so we're going to do it in weeks and hope it's good enough." Over the next several weeks, the coalition began to take shape. Human and Velcor officers trained together, learning each other's languages and combat styles. Engineers from both species worked to make their technologies compatible. Diplomats established communication protocols and command structures. It was chaos, but it was productive chaos. Captain Lisa Morgan found herself commanding a mixed squadron of human and Velcor ships. It was challenging. The Velcor had different communication styles, different tactical preferences, different ways of thinking. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Velcor, and the galaxy was unrecognizable. The Terran Defense Coalition now included 37 member species. Their combined fleets patrolled vast regions of space, responding to threats that would have gone unanswered just a year earlier. Pirates had learned to avoid systems under coalition protection. Aggressive civilizations thought twice before invading their neighbors, and species that had lived in fear for generations were beginning to hope. But success brought new challenges. Admiral Kevin Price stood in the operations center of a new space station called Sentinel-1. It orbited a neutral star system and served as the coalition's headquarters. Around him, officers from dozens of different species worked at their stations, monitoring communications from across their territory. It was organized chaos, but it was working. "Admiral, we have a situation," Commander Helen Carter said, approaching with a data pad. "The Galactic Council has issued a formal complaint. They're saying we violated the territorial sovereignty of the Markan system when we responded to their pirate problem last week." Price sighed. The Council had been finding reasons to complain about every coalition action. They saw humanity's organization as a threat to their authority, which was accurate. The coalition was proving that species didn't need the Council's permission to help each other. What do they want us to do? Apologize for stopping pirates? They want us to submit all future operations for Council review before taking action. That's not going to happen. By the time the Council finished reviewing our plans, the people we were trying to help would be dead. Price paused. Send them a polite response. Tell them we appreciate their concern, but the coalition will continue to respond to legitimate distress calls with or without their approval. That's going to escalate tensions, sir. I know. But we can't compromise on this. If we start asking permission, we become just another bureaucracy that talks instead of acts. Carter nodded and left to draft the response. Price turned back to the main display, which showed the current positions of all Coalition fleets. It was impressive. Human ships worked alongside Velcor, Pelthion, Cortax, and dozens of other species. They had different technologies, different cultures, different ways of thinking. But they shared one crucial belief: the strong should protect the weak. His communicator buzzed. It was Ambassador Claire Rodriguez calling from the Council station. "Admiral, we have a problem," Claire said without preamble. "The Council is planning to impose sanctions on Coalition member species. They're going to restrict trade, deny docking rights, and isolate us diplomatically. Can they do that? They can try. The question is whether other species will go along with it. The Council has influence, but they're not as powerful as they used to be. A lot of species are quietly supporting what we're doing, even if they won't say so publicly." Price thought for a moment. What if we forced them to choose? What if we did something so significant that species would have to decide whether they support the old way or the new way? What did you have in mind? The Krath trials start next week. We've been gathering evidence for months. War crimes, genocide, systematic torture. We have enough proof to convict them 100 times over. What if we invited every species in the galaxy to watch? Claire was quiet for a moment. That would be a direct challenge to the Council. They've been trying to handle the Krath situation quietly. If we broadcast the trials publicly, we expose how badly they failed to stop the genocide. Exactly. The galaxy needs to see the truth. They need to understand what happens when everyone stands by and does nothing, and they need to decide what kind of galaxy they want to live in. This could backfire. The Council has resources we don't. They could make life very difficult for us. They could. But I think most species are tired of being afraid. I think they're ready for change. We just need to give them a reason to believe change is possible. Claire considered this. All right, I'll support it. But we need to do this right. The trials need to be completely fair and transparent. We can't look like we're seeking revenge. This has to be about justice. Agreed. I'll coordinate with our legal teams. We'll make this the most carefully documented trial in galactic history. The preparations took a week. Human and Coalition lawyers worked around the clock to organize the evidence. Thousands of statements from survivors were compiled. Forensic teams analyzed the prison ships and documented every crime. The Krath prisoners were given access to defense attorneys from neutral species. Everything was done by established legal protocols. When the trials began, they were broadcast across every communication network in the galaxy. Billions of beings watched as the evidence was presented. They saw recordings of Krath attacks on civilian populations. They heard testimony from survivors who had lost everything. They learned about the prison ships and the experiments and the systematic cruelty. And most importantly, they learned how long the Krath had been doing this while the Council did nothing. Lieutenant Beth Sanders served as one of the lead prosecutors. She stood in the courtroom and addressed not just the judges but the entire galaxy. For 10 years, the Krath swarm conquered and destroyed. They attacked 47 star systems. They killed or enslaved billions of sentient beings. They committed crimes so terrible that we struggle to find words to describe them. And throughout all of this, they faced no consequences. No one stopped them. No one even tried to stop them. Until humanity and our Coalition partners finally said enough. She paused, letting her words sink in. This trial is not just about punishing the guilty. It is about establishing a principle. The principle that genocide will not be tolerated. The principle that aggressors will face justice. The principle that the innocent deserve protection, not just sympathy. The Krath defense attorneys argued that their clients were following the instincts of their species, that they didn't understand their actions were wrong, that they should be treated with mercy. But the evidence was overwhelming. The judges selected from neutral species had no choice but to convict. Hive Commander Zal then was sentenced to life imprisonment. Other Krath leaders received similar sentences. The surviving Krath population was placed under monitoring and required to pay reparations to their victims. It was justice, though many felt it was inadequate given the scale of the crimes. But the trial's impact went far beyond the verdicts. It sparked conversations across the galaxy about responsibility, intervention, and the nature of civilization itself. Species that had stayed neutral began questioning their choices. The Council's authority continued to erode as more civilizations looked to the Coalition as an alternative. 3 weeks after the trials ended, something unprecedented happened. A Council member species, the Rethian Commonwealth, announced they were leaving the Council to join the Terran Defense Coalition. They were quickly followed by 4 others. The Council, which had stood for thousands of years, was beginning to fracture. Tolmarath requested a private meeting with Admiral Price and Ambassador Rodriguez. They met on neutral ground, a small space station far from any major population center. The ancient being looked tired, which was remarkable given his species rarely showed emotion. "You have won," Tolmarath said simply. "The Council can no longer function as it once did. Too many species have left. Too many others are questioning our authority." "This was never about winning," Price replied. "This was about doing what's right." "And you believe your way is right? Your method of intervention, of military force, of imposing your values on the galaxy?" "We're not imposing our values. We're offering an alternative. Species are choosing to join us because they want something better than what the Council provided." Tolmarath was silent for a long moment. "My species has existed for millions of years. We have seen civilizations rise and fall. We created the Council because we believed that stability was the highest good. We thought that if we could prevent major wars, preserve the balance of power, and maintain order, we would create a peaceful galaxy. But you forgot something," Claire said gently. "You forgot that peace without justice isn't really peace. It's just the absence of large-scale war. Meanwhile, smaller atrocities happen constantly, and no one stops them because it would disturb the stability." "You are young," Tolmarath said. "You do not understand the costs of the interventionist approach you advocate. You will find yourselves drawn into endless conflicts. Your resources will be drained. Your people will grow weary of fighting other people's battles." "Maybe," Price acknowledged. "But at least we'll be able to look at ourselves in the mirror. At least we'll know we tried to make things better." Tolmarath nodded slowly. "The Council wishes to propose something. Rather than oppose you, we would like to work with you. The Council has resources, diplomatic channels, and institutional knowledge. The Coalition has energy, military strength, and moral clarity. Together we might achieve what neither could alone." Claire and Price exchanged glances. This was unexpected. The Council had spent months trying to undermine the Coalition. Now they wanted to cooperate? What would that look like? Claire asked carefully. The Council would maintain its role as a forum for diplomatic discussion. But when military intervention is needed, when innocent lives are at stake, we would defer to the Coalition. 2 years after the Battle of Velcor, the galaxy had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The Terran Defense Coalition now protected over 200 star systems and included 63 member species. Their ships patrolled trade routes, responded to emergencies, and stood ready to defend the innocent. The galaxy was not perfect, but it was undeniably safer than it had been before humanity arrived. Captain Lisa Morgan commanded the Coalition task force stationed near the border of unexplored space. Her mixed fleet of human and alien vessels conducted regular patrols, maintained communications networks, and investigated reports of suspicious activity. It was routine work most of the time, but Morgan had learned that routine could change to crisis in an instant. "Captain, we're picking up something strange," Lieutenant Paul Stevens reported from the sensor station. "There's a massive energy signature emerging from the void. It's bigger than anything I've ever seen." Morgan moved to look at his display. The readings were indeed unusual. Something huge was coming out of faster-than-light travel, and it was heading toward Coalition space. "Sound General Quarters. Get me Admiral Price on secure communications, and someone figure out what that thing is." Over the next 10 minutes, the picture became clearer and more concerning. The contact was a massive fleet, over 1,000 ships strong. They were using technology that didn't match any known civilization. And they were headed directly toward a heavily populated sector of Coalition space. Admiral Price's face appeared on Morgan's command screen. He looked grim. "Captain, we're seeing the same thing you are. We've sent first contact protocols, but they're not responding. Position your task force to intercept, but do not engage unless fired upon." We're scrambling reinforcements now. Understood, sir. What do we know about them? Nothing. They're completely unknown. Could be explorers. Could be traders. Could be another Krath situation. We prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Morgan assembled her task force into defensive formation. Within hours, ships from across the coalition began arriving. Commander Jaren brought the Velcor fleet. Pelthion and Cortax vessels took up positions. Even species who had only recently joined the coalition sent ships. By the time the unknown fleet reached weapons range, over 500 coalition vessels were ready to respond. The unknown ships were enormous, each one the size of a small moon. They moved slowly but with obvious purpose. As they drew closer, Morgan could see that their hulls were covered in strange markings and what appeared to be weapon ports. Lots of weapon ports. Still no response to our communications, Stevens reported. They're definitely receiving our messages. They're just choosing not to answer. Then, without warning, the unknown fleet stopped. For several minutes, nothing happened. Both sides sat in space, weapons ready, waiting to see who would make the first move. Finally, a communication came through. The voice was deep and resonated in a way that suggested artificial enhancement. The translation software struggled to render it into understandable language. We are the gathered. We have observed your coalition from a distance. We have seen your actions, studied your methods, and evaluated your claims. We have come to deliver judgment. Morgan felt her blood run cold. Judgment? What does that mean? You claim to protect the innocent. You claim to fight for justice. We have seen civilizations make such claims before. They always lie. They use noble words to hide selfish motives. We have come to test whether you are different or merely another hypocrite species pretending at virtue. Admiral Price's voice cut in. This is Admiral Kevin Price of the Terran Defense Coalition. We don't recognize your authority to judge us or anyone else. State your intentions clearly. Our intentions are clear. We will attack one of your protected systems. If you respond as you claim you would, if you actually protect the innocent at cost to yourselves, then we will know your words have truth. If you do not, if you make excuses or negotiate or prioritize your own survival, then we will know you are frauds, and we will treat you accordingly. You're threatening innocent civilians to test us? Morgan couldn't keep the anger from her voice. That's insane. That is reality. Words mean nothing. Only actions reveal truth. You have 3 hours to prepare. Choose your response carefully. The communication cut off. The massive fleet began moving again, heading toward a system called Verena. It was a peaceful world inhabited by a species called the Quintar, farmers and artists who had joined the coalition because they valued its protection. They had no military to speak of. If the gathered attacked, thousands would die. They're testing us, Price said over the command channel. They want to see if we'll actually fight to protect others when it costs us dearly. Sir, their fleet is massive, Morgan said. We're outnumbered 2-1 and their ships are huge. If we engage, we could lose half our fleet. I know, but if we don't engage, we prove them right. We prove that all our talk about protecting the innocent was just talk. We lose credibility with every species that's counting on us. Commander Jaren spoke up from his ship. Admiral, the Velcor fleet stands ready to fight. We remember what it was like when no one came to help us. We will not abandon the Quintar no matter the cost. Other voices joined in. The Pelthion, the Cortax, the Rethian, and dozens of others all declared their readiness to fight. Species that had been enemies just years ago now stood united in defense of people they had never met. Price made his decision. All ships set course for Verena. Combat speed. We're going to show the gathered exactly what the coalition stands for. And if they want to judge us, they can judge us by our actions. The coalition fleet raced toward Verena. They knew they were likely flying into a trap. The gathered clearly had superior numbers and technology. But they went anyway, because that was what the coalition meant. You protected the innocent even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. They arrived at Verena to find the gathered fleet in orbit. The massive ships had not attacked yet, but their weapons were powered and targeting the planet below. Millions of Quintar civilians huddled in shelters, terrified and confused about why these strangers had come to threaten them. Gathered fleet, this is Admiral Price. You wanted to test us? Here we are. If you attack that planet, you'll have to go through us first, the deep voice responded. You came, despite knowing you are outmatched, despite the risk to your own survival. You came to defend strangers. That's what we do. That's what the coalition is for. Now either attack or leave, but stop threatening innocent people. There was a long pause. Morgan's hands tightened on her command chair. Around her, the crew prepared for battle. This was going to be brutal. They might not survive it, but they were here and they would fight. Then something unexpected happened. The gathered fleet's weapons powered down. Their ships began moving away from the planet, taking up non-threatening positions. "You have passed our test," the voice said. "We are the Gathered, an alliance of species from beyond your region of space. For millennia, we have watched younger civilizations rise and fall. We have seen empire after empire claim to stand for justice while practicing cruelty. We have grown cynical about the nature of civilization itself. So you threaten innocent people to test others?" Price's voice was cold with anger. "That makes you no better than the tyrants you claim to judge. Perhaps. But consider what we have learned today. When the Krath attacked the Velcor, the established powers of this region did nothing. When pirates and raiders prey on the weak, most civilizations turn away. But you, a coalition led by a species barely a century in space, responded immediately. You risked everything to protect strangers. This is remarkable. This is new." Morgan felt her anger warring with confusion. "So this was all a test? You were never going to attack?" "We were prepared to attack if necessary. If you had not come, if you had made excuses, if you had tried to negotiate the lives of the Quintar away, we would have judged you harshly. But you came. You all came. Human, Velcor, Pelthion, Cortax, and dozens of others. You came together to protect the innocent, knowing you might die in the attempt. This is the behavior of a true civilization." Admiral Price's face appeared on Morgan's screen. He looked exhausted and angry. "What do you want from us?" "We wish to join your coalition. We have resources, technology, and military strength that surpass your own. We have been searching for a civilization that actually lives up to its ideals. You appear to be that civilization. We would like to help you spread those ideals across the galaxy." The offer hung in the space between the fleets. Morgan could barely process it. The Gathered wanted to join them. These ancient, powerful beings wanted to work with the coalition. "You threatened innocent people to test us," Price said slowly. "That's not acceptable behavior. If you want to join the coalition, you need to understand something fundamental. We don't terrorize civilians ever, for any reason. If you can't agree to that, then we don't want your help." Another pause. "Then, you would turn down our assistance over a matter of principle? Even knowing what we could contribute? Especially knowing what you could contribute. Power without principles is just tyranny with better weapons. The coalition stands for something. If you want to be part of it, you need to stand for those same things." Morgan held her breath. This could go either way. The Gathered could,